Fear is one of those things that we talk about on this podcast so much. Pushing through your fear, being willing to expand your comfort zone. I recently had a great conversation with Allison Waring, who's an author. She has a course for creating memoirs. It was this absolutely fantastic conversation. And there were things that were said in that conversation in relationship to fear and comfort zones and growth that, when combined with all of the things that I always already express and things that I've learned from the last couple of podcast guests, it created this learning that I really just needed to share with you. And that is, what's fear and what's resistance? How do you tell the difference between the two? How do you push through one? How do you figure out, is this something that I don't really want to do? Is this something that I'm afraid of? What is the reason that I am resisting this thing so much? Answering that question is incredibly important to being able to accomplish what you want to accomplish, to being able to create the life that you've always wanted. And it's also so hard to ask. It's a place that we have to step into to be able to be vulnerable enough to have that conversation. I'm really, really excited to share this topic with you guys. My name is Amber Fuhriman, and this is the More Than Corporate podcast. Welcome to the More Than Corporate podcast. I'm Amber Fuhriman, recovering perfectionist and serial accomplisher. If you're anything like I used to be, you've been living your life thinking that if you accomplish enough stuff, you'll finally find the success you've always wanted. But what if it's not about accomplishing more stuff? What if it's about accomplishing the right stuff? I believe you don't find success. You create it by intentionally designing the life you want and having the courage to get out of your comfort zone to live your design. I went from doing what I was supposed to do to doing what I love to do, and now I get to help others do the same. Keep listening as I chat with inspiring people who make it their mission to live their best life every day and learn how you too can live the life you've always wanted. Really quickly, before we jump into this, I want to remind you that this episode is brought to you by Success Development Solutions and the Design Your Life Mastermind. The Design Your Life Mastermind is an opportunity for you to connect with like-minded people. We dig into a different book every single month, a book that is recommended by or written by the guests on this podcast. We not only read that book, but we also share our perceptions of it. We get different ideas about the book than we would have if we were reading it on our own. We're able to see the learnings and the lessons differently. We talk about how we're going to implement those. And then when possible, we bring that author of the book in to have a conversation with us after reading that book. It's so fantastic. The connections you make, the transformation that will happen in your life, the people that will allow you to push through those barriers that we're going to be talking about, especially in this episode. If this is something that you're interested in, if you need that group, that circle to surround yourself with, if you want these resources, if you just want to have more accountability in doing what you know you should be doing to get the tools and resources that will allow you to create a better life for yourself, then click on the Calendly link below. Let's have a conversation to find out how we can get you to a point where you design the life you've always wanted, and we'll give you the resources so that you have the courage to get out of your comfort zone and live it. With that being said, let's jump into this topic. So, fear and resistance. Y'all know that I have this crazy relationship with comfort zones and fear and pushing past them. And it's more of a brute force through comfort zones and an F fear attitude that comes from feeling like you have no other choice. Right? That's where it started. It started with feeling like I've got to make a change. I can no longer stay in my comfort zone. Although it wasn't expressed that way, because nobody thinks that. We don't think, oh, I got to go out and do something uncomfortable. We think, man, this life hasn't created what I wanted. Or when is life supposed to get better? Or why have I worked so hard? When does it start paying off? We think I've tried everything else. I don't know what else to do to make this work. And then we just give in and do things that we wouldn't normally do because we think we have nothing to lose. This is part of where this transformational conversation with Allison Waring started. And then we got into fear and comfort zones and talked about how you know that you want to keep challenging yourself and how you know what you should be doing and what really isn't worth your time or your energy. And when I asked her this question, she says, I guess you have to figure out what is fear and what is resistance. And I thought, holy cow. Like, what's fear and what are you running away from? And how do you know the difference? And why is it important? And then the wheels in my brain started turning and I forgot that I was conducting an interview, and all of a sudden I had to recompose myself and ask another question. It doesn't happen often, but there are these really incredible conversations that I get into where I forget that I'm in an interview and all I want to do is soak up the information. And Allison's episode that's coming out on Monday is one of those episodes. So let's talk about fear for a minute. There's a couple of different things that come to mind when I think of fear. One of them is, if you look at my bookshelf behind me, and I'm backwards and I'm awful at this. If you look at my bookshelf behind me, there's a book called Making Mavericks, and it's one of my absolute favorite books. There's a movie called Chasing Mavericks that is about the story of Jay Moriarty, a surfer who was really young, started doing big wave surfing in California at a place called the Mavericks. It's his pushing through, doing things that he didn't think he could do, that nobody else could think he could do. And it's a true story. Jay unfortunately passed away very early in a diving accident. I think he was 21 or 22. Making Mavericks is the book by his coach. And so where Chasing Mavericks, the movie, is about Jay's journey, Making Mavericks is about who his coach was. What did he have to go through in his life to become the person who could coach a teenager to surf the most ridiculous waves in Southern California? And I love both of them combined together. Obviously, the movie is dramatized, and there's a scene in it where they're diving and they see a shark coming towards them, and Jay starts to panic. When they surface, his coach says, "What the hell was that?" And he says, "What do you mean, what was that?" "It was a shark." And he says, "No, I understand." He's like, "But the panic, what were you afraid of? Why did you panic?" And he says, "Well, I panicked because I was afraid." And he says, "That's what you need to understand. Fear and panic are two different emotions. Fear is healthy and panic is deadly." And I rewound that a couple of times. And for a little bit on my mirror, for those of you who don't know, I write things on my mirror like I'm in dorm room in college in dry erase marker. It said, "Fear is healthy, panic is deadly." And it's true that fear that we feel shows us that we're doing something different. We're doing something that makes us uncomfortable. We're doing something that has the opportunity to transform us from who we were before we pushed through the fear and who we are after we pushed through the fear. And the ability to do that is so empowering. It's not the fear that does it. It's not the action of what we completed. It's the action of believing in ourselves enough to push through when every fiber of our body is telling us that we can't do something. And we know that the only reason is fear. And then you push through that and you get this sense of accomplishment that you couldn't have any other way. Now, if instead of pushing through, you panic, you create a more dangerous situation for yourself than you would have if you were to push through. Fear is healthy, panic is deadly. This applies in so many different ways, not just swimming with sharks or surfing, big wave surfing. If you haven't checked out the movie or the book, I would highly suggest it. The other thing that comes to mind is, and this is where I sat during the interview with Allison for a minute, was that place that we have to go to in order to analyze, is this fear? Or is it resistance? Is it do I not know? Do I need resources? Do I need to learn something? Is this something I shouldn't be doing? Like, what is this feeling that's telling me to run the other way? The place that we have to go to answer that question is so vulnerable and imperfect, and forces us to acknowledge our weaknesses and our imperfections. Sometimes it forces us to acknowledge our strengths, which sometimes can be harder to acknowledge than our weaknesses and imperfections. And I had this flashback to running my 24-hour obstacle course race. You guys have heard me talk about this in multiple different ways. This race, training for this race, the people that I met while I was training for this race, the act of actually running this race, the lessons that I learned after, all of them were transformational in my journey to where I am now in my personal and business life. And as Allison was talking, and we were talking about fear and resistance and growth, and I remembered in the middle of my race, I wanted to quit so badly. I had one lap left to meet my goal. It was a lap in the morning. I had friends of mine that were ready to go out for their last lap. We were going to start it together. And I looked at my mom and I told her I wasn't going to go. My mom was my pit crew. I said, I'm not going to go. And she questioned me and she says, why aren't you going to go? And my brain went through all of the things that I thought would be able to convince myself that this wasn't a good idea. I don't feel good. I'm not strong enough. I can't do it. I don't want to get hurt. All of these things. And thank God to my mom, she kept pushing and kept pushing. And then I see a friend of mine walk by, somebody who has been there for me through so many of these races, and somebody under which I guess I felt like I couldn't hide. And I looked at my mom and I said, just give me a minute. And I walked away from her and I walked over to this friend and I said, I told my mom I'm not going out for my final lap. And he just looks at me and I said, I told her I don't feel good. And I told her that I'm not strong enough. I'm really afraid. And the moment I voiced it, the moment I said, I'm just afraid, it lost its power. It was like, are you going to let fear hold you back? No, I'm not going to let fear hold me back. And I was willing to step into this place. I can tell you that I finished World's Toughest Mudder meeting my goal of 25 miles. I met my goal of 24 hours active for the race. And had I not gone back out for that lap, number one, it would not have been the transformational experience that it was for me. Not in the same way. And number two, there would be this cloud of regret hanging over me because deep down inside, in every ounce of my body, every cell in my body, I knew that I wanted so badly to finish this race. And I was afraid. This is where so many of the things that we talk about come into play. Surrounding yourself with people who push you. I was only able to accomplish that because the people around me challenged me. You know, we talk in this space all the time. If you're the smartest person in the room, find another room. That's great in theory. Do you know how vulnerable it is to find another room? Do you know how scary it is to walk into a room where you know that you're not going to do everything right? You're not going to say everything right? How do we push through that? We push through that by knowing that everybody feels that way. And by surrounding ourselves with people who, whether it's on an obstacle course race in the desert, in the ocean, swimming with sharks, in your business, in your personal life, wherever it is, surrounding yourself with these people that challenge you and say, what's the real reason? What is it? Now, sometimes we come back and it's not fear. Sometimes it's, this isn't smart. I don't have all the tools, all the resources that I need to accomplish this. Imagine going skydiving and you're I really want to go skydiving and it terrifies the hell out of me. Imagine you're going skydiving and you're up in the plane and you are on the edge of that plane, getting ready to jump. And there's two different situations. You have a parachute in one, and you don't have a parachute in the other situation. One of those is fear. The fear that we've been talking about. Should I do this? Should I not do this? This is stupid. I don't really want this as bad as I do. All the things that I said when I jumped off the stratosphere. On the other side of that fear is accomplishment. It's growth. It's a side of you that you didn't know you had, and the person before you jump out of that plane and the person after you jump out of that plane, they're not the same people. The other side where you don't have the parachute, that's not fear. That's I don't have all the resources that I need to do this successfully. Then the question becomes, how do I get them? So once you acknowledge that you don't know everything, once you acknowledge that, yes, you have these goals and you want to do this thing and you want to be successful, you don't have the tools, resources, information, and knowledge that's going to allow you to be successful. You have two choices. You can accept that, crawl back in whatever little hole you were in before, the life that you don't like, the life that you thought that was going to change for you, or you can ask yourself, where can I get them? Who can I talk to? Who can I take a course from? Who can I learn from? What conference can I go to? What book can I read? What experiences can I put myself in that I do have the resources for that will challenge me? We get to decide, are we going to slowly push ourselves so that we can build up to having those resources? Are we going to create the parachute for ourselves so that when we jump, we know that it's fear and not, I don't have the resources? How do we know which is which? And the answer is, and I know that, I wish the analytical attorney part in me wishes that I could just give you a guide, a checklist that says, if this, then this, right? It doesn't work that way. Deep down inside, The question is, will you allow yourself to go there? If your answer is no, you will never have the life that you want to have. You will always be sitting on the sidelines, watching other people do the things that you wish you were strong enough to do. But if you're willing to step into that space, to be vulnerable, to be transparent, to be imperfect, if you're willing to step into that space to learn, to support others, to allow yourself to be supported, to acknowledge your strengths, to acknowledge your weaknesses, to transform who you are in the process, you can have any life that you want to create for yourself. We talk on this show so much about fear and comfort zones, and I end every single episode by telling you that you have the ability to design a life you've always wanted, and you owe it to yourself to get out of your comfort zone and live it. Making the plan's not enough. Taking the steps, that's where the courage to do something that you don't know how to do, the courage to seek help when you know that you need it to accomplish a goal. Those moments of facing your fear, of acknowledging that all the things that tell you that you can't do what you want to do, that they're bullshit, that it's fear, and that the moment that you push through them, you will have a life you couldn't even imagine. I get really, really emotional when I think about who I was 3 years ago. I get really emotional when I think about who I was 10 years ago and who I am now and the life that I've created. And the reason I'm able to do that is because I was willing to go to that place. And the reason that I was able to go to that place is because I felt like I had nothing to lose. That place where staying in your current position is scarier than taking the steps out into that place you're afraid of. Now I don't need to go to that place in order to take those steps. I know that when I'm afraid to go out on a stage and speak for the first time, that's fear. I have all the resources and information that I need to be successful. Can I always be better? Of course, we always can be. When you're creating a course for the first time, when you're teaching for the first time, when you're creating a podcast for the first time, this podcast just hit 2 years on August 2nd. 2 years ago, the podcast episodes were completely different because I'm different. And I'm different because I went to that place. I'm different because I stepped into that fear. I'm different because I challenged that voice in my head that said I can't do it. So my challenge to you is when you get to that spot where you're telling yourself you can't, you don't want to, it's not a good idea, I didn't want it as much as I thought I did, never mind, it's okay, I'll just stay where I'm at. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of? And see what you hear. Listen for the answer, because your mind will tell you exactly what you're afraid of. And the moment you acknowledge it, it loses its power. And I'll say it again. You have the ability to design a life you've always wanted, and you owe it to yourself to get out of your comfort zone and have the courage to live it. Take care, guys. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the More Than Corporate podcast. If anything that was said during this episode resonated with you or provided value in any way, it would mean the world to me if you would head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the More Than Corporate podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. I'm really looking forward to connecting with you. If you'd also like to connect, I've created a Facebook group that is full of amazing people who also make it their mission to live their best life every single day. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, the name of that Facebook group is Success Center. Head over there, request to join, and I look forward to connecting with you soon.